Hi, I'm Sarah Foxsmith, and I'm a integrative cancer coach. And I'm so happy you're here and that you found me. So let's go over and let's get started on this course. It's so exciting that you're here, and I get to talk a little bit about something that I'm really passionate about. So I'm going to spend the next 5 topics with you, sharing ways to optimize your health by minimizing exposure to environmental chemicals. So let's jump in. So before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit about myself and my background and why this work is so important to me. My name is Sarah, and I love teaching about oncology, about cancer. I have my master's degree in nursing, and I run a consulting practice where I support individuals who are either navigating cancer or seeking ways to prevent it. And my work centers on guiding clients towards remission and long term wellness through holistic strategies, one of which is fostering toxic free environments. And in my practice, I provide evidence based integrative care that combines conventional and complementary approaches through a lot of personalized coaching. I help clients take control of their health to detoxify their lives and their bodies and live in joy rather than in mostly fear. So now let's dive in. We're going to start with some context so we are all on the same page. We're going to begin by understanding environmental toxins and specifically your health. And I'm sure by now you've likely seen news articles or stories about things like toxic chemical spills or cancer causing chemicals in hairspray or sunscreens or deodorant, or even like contaminated water or the toxic effects of like air pollution. And of course, there is no question we're living in toxic times. Most of the news articles and headlines and TV segments on this topic focus on dangers associated with these toxic chemicals, but rarely provide clear or actionable steps for people to take. And the result is that folks are really anxious and they're overwhelmed. And if that's you, you're not alone. The anxiety is one of the reasons why I wanted to offer this program. So, over the next 5 sessions, we're going to calm that anxiety and leave you with clear steps to systematically lower your toxic exposure, all without turning your life really upside down. And in today's intro session, we're going to lay the foundation for how important this work is by zooming out and then looking at the bigger picture when it comes to environmental toxin exposure. And then in the next section, we're going to zoom in to take a look at some of the most common exposures to toxins that happen throughout food and primarily looking at chemicals that you won't find really on any ingredient label. Now, when most people hear the phrase environmental toxin or environmental chemicals, they'll think of things like air pollution or factories or car exhaust, maybe oil spills or ocean pollution, and even soil pollution. And if that's what you think, that's pretty common. And since you're here in this class, you may already know that it's probably far more than that, but maybe you used to think of those things. And these are all sort of considered toxic environmental exposures for sure. And many of them are really directly linked to serious health issues, including heart disease and cancers and fertility problems. These are what I call out there exposures, things that are happening in our broader environment. And people tend to overlook completely the tiny amounts of toxic exposure we get every single day just by living our regular, normal lives. And these exposures happen through our food, the products we use to cook in and store our food in, and things maybe we even use to clean our homes or personal care products, maybe even the air we breathe. These are what I call in here exposures. And in here exposures are the ones that individuals like us, we have far more control over them than the out there exposures, like from car exhaust or oil spills. And of course, while we can't control every exposure we get, we do have a greater amount of control when we're looking at these everyday items and behaviors in our homes. And this is what we will dig into in this course. Now, most people, when they hear the phrase environmental toxin or environmental chemical or toxic chemical will often only be thinking about acute exposures. the kind that might send someone into an emergency room with like vomiting or seizures or something like skin blistering or swelling. These things can happen, but the exposures that result in an emergency are pretty rare for the average person. So, in this conversation, we're going to talk about what are called chronic exposures, typically very low levels of exposures that rarely result in immediate or acute health issues, but can over time lead to or contribute to things like heart disease, infertility, allergies, maybe learning disabilities, obesity, cancers, immune system issues, and a whole bunch of more other things. So while you might naturally think that the low levels of chemical exposures we get from, say, our shampoo or laundry detergent aren't all that meaningful, there is substantial research showing that at least when it comes to some of these chemicals, specifically ones that can interfere with our hormones, these tiny exposures do matter a lot. And we'll be talking through some specific examples of this inside the course. So let's zoom out for a moment to look at the bigger picture before we start to zoom back in. Now, worldwide, there is an estimated of about 350,000 chemicals and mixtures of chemicals registered for production and use. Now, not all of these chemicals are toxic. In fact, many chemicals have improved our lives for sure. They've made things safer and better and easier. So we're not demonizing chemicals here. What we are doing is examining the opportunities to lower exposure to some of the chemicals that we know have potential to cause harm in our bodies and to our health. And so it's important to state that, and technically speaking, everything is chemical. What we're focused on in this course are chemicals that are known or suspected to cause or contribute to some health issues. Now, in the United States, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention run the National Health and Examination Study, which is designed to assess the health and nutritional status of adults and children. And this examination study is an analysis of chemicals in the bodies of US citizens. Now, to date, they've found metabolites, that's what the chemicals break down into your bodies are, of over 200 chemicals. Now, just because a chemical is measured in our body, it doesn't automatically mean that that chemical is causing harm or making us sick. But not every chemical in circulation is being tested. So 200 chemicals is likely an underestimate. Now, these population wide studies show that chemicals can easily migrate from the products and materials they're used in into our bodies, and that some chemicals are found in nearly every single person. Now, I want you to stop and think. Have you thought of a product that was for sale and thought that meant that product was safe? So I want you to think about that for a second. That is actually something that most people think. Like, you're not alone in thinking that. The assumption here is that products for sale have been adequately tested for safety before they go to the market. And unfortunately, that's not really the case. The primary policy that regulates most of the US chemicals in commerce, the Toxic Substance Control Act, was presented first in 1976. It never required it to state that. In 2016, the TOSCA was updated for the first time in 40 years. And for the first time, the law required that the U.S. Environmental Protective Agency to actually review and demand safety data sheets on chemicals. So only 20 at a time. Now, given that 40,000 chemicals already are in use and roughly 2,000 new ones are introduced every year, it's kind of estimated that it'll take the EPA literally centuries to ensure the safety of chemicals in commerce. Now, while the law has changed, from a practical sense, we still don't have an assurance that safety of the products are on the shelf. So this graph here is from the EPA's website. It describes and depicts how new chemicals are reviewed and assessed under the newly updated Toxin Substance Control Act. Not only is it complicated, but there are also many things that can exempt a chemical from needing to be reviewed for safety. So in the meantime, the population continues to be exposed to low levels of chemicals from thousands of different places every day. This is the pathway for the US. In Canada and Europe, there's several stricter safety rules governing testing, which we'll discuss throughout this course. Now, not all chemicals are linked to disease, but many of them are. In fact, there are thousands of studies linking low levels of toxic exposure to an enormous list of serious chronic health issues, including hormone issues and like infertility or early onset period, maybe early onset menopause, hormonally driven cancers, sometimes metabolic issues, including insulin resistance or weight gain, neurological conditions like Alzheimer's, or sometimes cancers, immune system issues, behavioral problems. Now, while the full cost burden of exposure to all of these toxic chemicals hasn't really been calculated, partly because we're still learning about which chemicals in commerce might have toxic effects, we do have some figures, and they're not really great. So, for example, exposure to just 7 chemicals, all known for messing with our hormones, called endocrine disrupting chemicals that we are exposed to regularly, was estimated in 2016, a study to cost the US around 340 billion in healthcare and lost wages. Now, this was nearly twice the disease burden cost in the European Union, where chemicals are regulated more strictly. In a 2022 study, they found that the cost of treating disease attributed to PFAS, which are forever chemicals, is as much as 62.6 billion. We'll talk about this topic more in topic 2. Now, not all people are equally exposed. In addition to kind of occupational exposure, some populations, particularly low income individuals, regardless of race or ethnicity, and Black and Brown communities specifically, are disproportionately exposed to more toxic chemicals in their communities than more affluent and white communities. And our most vulnerable populations, however, are babies in utero, and environmental chemical exposures that occur during fetal development can lead to irreversible effects. Everything from neurodevelopment issues to birth defects to increased risk of heart disease, cancer, and metabolic disease in adulthood. And in 2009, the Environmental Working Group tested the umbilical cord of 10 babies for toxic chemicals, first study of its kind. And they found nearly 300 man made chemicals, including 180 carcinogens, chemicals that cause cancer, 217 neurotoxins. These are chemicals that can interfere with normal brain development and functioning, and 208 reproductive toxins. If you add all that up, those numbers, you'll get more than 287 total chemicals that were found. That's because many chemicals can have more than one toxic effect, meaning that a chemical can be both a carcinogen and a reproductive toxicant. They can be a neurotoxin and a carcinogen. Now, follow up studies conducted more recently have found that similar concerning numbers and levels of chemicals are found in umbilical cord blood. So, these early life exposures can have a profound impact on the health of children and their health in adulthood. So, clearly, our constant exposure to toxic chemicals isn't something to take lightly. It matters, which is why I'm so glad you're here in this course. So, one thing that often pops up for people when they start learning about environmental chemicals is detox or detoxification protocols. So, let's talk about that for just a moment. First off, our bodies are detoxifying 24/7 through our primary organs of detoxification, which is the liver and the kidneys and the colon and the lungs and the lymphatic system and the skin. So these systems are excellent at helping metabolize and eliminate many toxic chemicals, but these systems are often not functioning properly in all people all the time and can benefit from some support. For example, according to the American Liver Foundation, more than 100 million people in the US have some form of liver disease that compromise liver function. Now, when people think about detox protocols, they're often thinking of like supplements like activated charcoal, which can, of course, help pull out some toxic compounds, primarily metals. But this topic of environmental exposure isn't something we can pop a pill for or detox our way out of it. Instead, we need to focus on 2 core actions. So let's look at those. The number one core function is to turn down the volume on toxic exposures first. We do that by reducing exposures in as many places as possible. It means changing the products we use and the behaviors we engage in ways that can minimize that exposure. The goal here isn't zero exposure. It's not possible for us to have zero exposures, but we can lower our exposures, and that's the goal here. The second core focus is to turn the volume up on our body's innate ability to metabolize and detoxify. So, this means supporting our organs of detoxification. So, making sure that you're pooing and that you're eating nutrient dense foods that provide the liver with the nutrients needed to facilitate detoxification. And we want to make sure that we're properly hydrating with clean water. And we want to support our body's ability to sweat and to sleep really well. So, over the next 5 sessions, we'll be focusing on systematically turning down our exposure. And I will be giving you tips and tricks for this in each session. There are going to be helpful handouts and resources to help you on your journey. So, jump into topic 1, where we'll start to look at the foods that we eat. And on these slides, these are just the resources that I used. It's the mapping of the resources to the slides for the numbers. And I look forward to seeing you in the next topic.